2024. After years of waiting, S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 Heart of Chernobyl is finally here. It's a big release, selling well around the world and getting positive reviews. The long-awaited sequel to the cult series turned out to be truly impressive, but for many players, this is their first time entering the zone. The original trilogy came out 15 years ago and never became very popular in the West, so a lot of players don't even know it existed. But that's the West. In Eastern Europe, the story is very different and much more interesting. For many players in Eastern Europe, S.T.A.L.K.E.R is more than just a game. It's a true cultural phenomenon. When the original title was released in 2007, it made a huge impact across Eastern Europe and the post-Soviet world. And over the past 15 years, its popularity hasn't disappeared. People kept playing it, talking about it, making countless mods, and of course, waiting for the sequel. In the West, S.T.A.L.K.E.R is seen through a different lens. To many players, it feels like a strange, atmospheric take on a post-apocalypse, like Fallout, but set in the ruins of Chernobyl. But why did S.T.A.L.K.E.R become a cult classic, specifically in Eastern Europe? What makes it stand out from Western games? And how did the Soviet legacy help shape its dark, unforgettable atmosphere? To answer that, we need to go deeper into the history, the culture, and the mindset behind the zone. For those new to the series, here's a quick introduction. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is a game series created by the Ukrainian studio GSC Game World, set in an alternate version of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. In the game's story, a second explosion hits the reactor, turning the zone into a dangerous and mysterious place full of mutants, anomalies, and deadly secrets. Anomalies are physical distortions of space that are dangerous to humans. They generate artifacts, objects with incredible properties that are worth a fortune. The zone becomes a magnet for desperate fortune seekers known as stalkers. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is a blend of shooter, RPG, and survival. The game offers a non-linear story, an open world, and highly immersive gameplay. One of the most unique aspects of the series is the A-Live system. It makes the game world feel alive and unpredictable. Here, it's not just the player who influences events. The zone itself has a life of its own. Mutants and other stalkers don't just spawn around the player. They exist in the game world at all times. They roam, fight each other, and sometimes fall victim to deadly anomaly. This creates a dynamic environment where anything can happen, with or without you. When players encounter A-Life in action or witness its consequences, it creates an incredible level of immersion. Every playthrough feels unique. You never know what's waiting around the next corner. Another stalker, a horde of mutants, or a deadly anomaly. S.T.A.L.K.E.R isn't just about pretty backdrops designed to entertain the player while they follow a scripted storyline. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is a dangerous, hostile world that couldn't care less about the player's existence. However, the game's development was full of challenges and setbacks. Work began all the way back in 2001, and the team was so dedicated to realism that they even traveled to Pripyat to gather references and capture the true atmosphere of the zone. The young studio had big ambitions, but due to lack of experience, development quickly fell into production hell. After 6 long years of hard work, the game was finally released, but in a rough and unfinished state. It was full of bugs, missing content, graphical problems, crashes, poor balance, and a broken AI. Players who had expected a groundbreaking game, a revolution in genre, were left disappointed. Despite these issues, S.T.A.L.K.E.R achieved cult status and built a massive fanbase across Eastern Europe. Yes, the game sold well in the West and received solid reviews, but for Western players, S.T.A.L.K.E.R was just another interesting game. So why did S.T.A.L.K.E.R resonate so deeply with players from Eastern Europe? Why, for us, is it more than just a game? In the West, post-apocalyptic settings are often associated with deserts, nuclear wastelands, or something out of Mad Max. But in Eastern Europe, it looks different. Grey concrete apartment blocks, cracked roads, abandoned factories, and the remnants of the Soviet era. For those who lived through the collapse of the USSR, this aesthetics isn't just a fantasy, it's a part of reality. Abandoned buildings, empty villages, resource shortages, these aren't visions of a distant future, but echoes of the recent past. The Chernobyl disaster became a powerful symbol of the Soviet system's failure. It created the perfect setting for an atmosphere of loneliness, danger, and mystery. the core of what makes S.T.A.L.K.E.R so compelling. In the game, every step could be your last, because of radiation, anomalies, or mutants. Of course, there were no mutants in real life during the 1990s, but the feeling of constant danger was real. Economic collapse, rising crime, and a society falling apart. Maybe that's why S.T.A.L.K.E.R connected so deeply with older gamers. Today many fans remember seeing the game for the first time, watching their father play. The slow, thoughtful gameplay, the familiar grain landscapes, bandits drinking vodka, and tough men sharing old jokes around the campfire. It all created the perfect world to escape into after a long day. Melancholic, but strangely comforting. Even though this atmosphere was strongest in the first decade after the USSR's collapse, you can still feel it today, especially in Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. In many small towns and villages, there are still empty lots, abandoned buildings, and the lasting signs of a post-Soviet collapse. Life in these places is hard. Low wages, daily struggles, and little hope for change. That's why kids who grew up in the 2000s instinctively understand the world of S.T.A.L.K.E.R, because in many ways it feels like home. But the developers didn't just throw some grey concrete buildings into the game and call it a day. They recreated the atmosphere with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Their trip to Pripyat wasn't just to take photos. They directly used real-world materials in the game, including sounds and textures. They capture everything, the shape of buildings, the look inside abandoned apartments, and even the smallest signs of decay. For its time, S.T.A.L.K.E.R was also visually impressive. Sure, the game had issues with animations and character models, but their architecture was stunning. One of the most memorable aspects was its dynamic lighting. 15 years ago, it was revolutionary. Artificial light in dark rooms looked incredibly real, and every object cast a shadow, adding to the eerie and unsettling mood. Every building, every character, every item felt familiar, as if taken straight from real life. Compare this to Fallout 3, which is often mentioned alongside S.T.A.L.K.E.R and came out around the same time. While Fallout 3 had impressive graphics for its era, its world felt more cartoonish and less serious. Playing it, you felt like a character in a comic book, a world that only vaguely resembled reality. And that's the secret behind S.T.A.L.K.E.R's atmosphere, a bleak, abandoned, danger-filled world that feels uncomfortably real. But this atmosphere wasn't built on visuals and sound alone. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is filled with cultural references and small details that make it especially relatable for players from Eastern Europe. For many, when they hear the name S.T.A.L.K.E.R, one specific meme instantly comes to mind. A line spoken by in-game bandits, made iconic by their signature background music. But these aren't just funny characters saying random lines. Their personalities are directly inspired by the criminal subculture of the post-Soviet era. In the game, bandits speak a mix of Russian and Ukrainian, filled with prison slang and street language. For players from Eastern Europe, these characters didn't feel fictional, they were familiar. The kind of people you might see on the street, sit next on a crowded bus, or awkwardly share a meal with when some distant, shady relatives came to visit. Even the jokes that bandits and stalkers tell around campfire are modified versions of real-life, well-known Eastern European jokes. And the bandits' infamous theme song, which later became a meme, it's actually a reinterpretation of a hugely popular song from the early 2000s. So what do we get in the end? Imagine a school kid playing S.T.A.L.K.E.R, then stepping outside into the real world, surrounded by the same concrete apartment blocks, the same empty lots, the same abandoned buildings. He walks into one of them to meet his friends, and together they split into fractions, pretending to be stalkers exploring the dark corners of the zone. All it takes is a little imagination, and the real world becomes the world of S.T.A.L.K.E.R. And now we've come to the most fascinating part. Let's try to understand who are stalkers. At their core, they're people who venture into a dangerous and unknown place, driven by either dreams or greed. It's easy to draw a parallel with millions of real people who try to find their way after the collapse of the USSR. Just like the zone, the world they faced was both familiar and alien, a place where old rules no longer worked and new ones hadn't yet formed. It was a space filled with uncertainty, risk, and quiet hope. The entire game world is steeped in this duality, as time itself has frozen somewhere between life and death. The zone is a world of raw, rough strength and masculinity. In the original trilogy, there isn't a single female character. While playing S.T.A.L.K.E.R, boys could fully feel what it meant to be men, thrown into a tough virtual world where they had to survive, protect others, and do hard work hunting for artifacts. Later they could sit by the campfire with other men, resting and telling stories. Stalkers, like people in hard times, live by the principles of every man for himself. But they still stick together when necessary. In the 1990s, many people acted on their own, but sometimes found safety in small groups, families, friends, or close communities. However, just like in real life, when the world around you is truly harsh, any sense of community is fragile. You always know that, if it benefits them, someone might betray you without hesitation. In the zone, genuine emotional connections are rare. Stalkers are rough, unemotional, and generally indifferent to others. You can feel this in their dialogue. Almost no one greets you warmly upon first meeting, starting from the very first game in the series, right in Ridge's bunker. This unpleasant trader immediately makes it clear he isn't going to help you out of kindness. He tries to get as much profit from you as possible, offering help only if it benefits him. He sells overpriced goods, constantly complains about what you bring him, and always prioritizes his own gain. This attitude follows the player throughout the game. Traders and other characters, even if they're not openly hostile, they're usually cold, curt, and dismissive. There are even more direct examples of this atmosphere of distrust. Warning: spoilers. Take, for example, a group of stalkers in Dark Valley who offer to sell the player an incredibly powerful weapon, a Gauss gun, for just 800 rubles. But if you hand over the money, of course, no gun ever appears. If you want your cash back, you'll need the courage and skill to take it back by force. Or the infamous bandit robbery in the underground hideout, where the player is stripped of all of their inventory and left with nothing but a pistol. The only way to set things right is to track down the thieves and reclaim what's yours. These kinds of rules of the game feel eerily familiar to those from post-Soviet countries. In an economy marked by hardship and weak institutions, everyone is looking out for themselves. Everything is bought and sold. Justice and morality, long forgotten concepts. People don't trust each other. They act cold and distant, expecting deception or danger from any unfamiliar face. It's every man for himself. And just like in the real world, stalkers cooperate and form groups only when it helps them survive. The moment it becomes unprofitable to stay loyal, no moral code will stop them from betraying you. Morality does not exist in the zone. Yet, despite this cold and transactional nature of relationships in the zone, it's all there is. And that's something that you have to accept. Yes, people in the zone can be selfish, brutal, and cruel, more like wild animals than humans. But even so, being around others is still better than facing the zone alone. That's why some of the most memorable moments in S.T.A.L.K.E.R happen when you come back from the dangerous trip to camp, a place that feels relatively safe. You stop by the trader to resupply, buy some sausages and vodka, and watch other stalkers sitting around the fire, playing guitars, cracking jokes, and talking about the zone. This sense of immersion is made even stronger by the A-Life system. You start to realize that stalkers aren't just background NPCs, they're part of a living world. After they rest, they'll head back out to search for artifacts and fight off mutants. And later, somewhere deep in the zone, you might run into one of them again. And it's in these fireside conversations that the game's deeper meaning is revealed. If you stop and listen to what the stalkers say, you'll see they're just ordinary people with personal stories. They talk about the past, dream about the future, and share their fears. Their words, like the whole mood of the game, carry a strong feeling of loneliness. Each person in the zone is alone, with their thoughts, their memories, and the constant pressure to survive and find artifacts. But in those short moments of rest, sitting by the fire in temporary safety, they seem to remember they're human. Their conversations are filled with sadness and regret, because they know that tomorrow they'll have to go back into the zone. They'll have to be cold, they'll have to lie, fight, maybe even kill, not because they want to, but because it's the only way to stay alive. In a world where life is always under threat, they slowly become tougher and more brutal, though maybe deep inside they never wanted to change at all. And that feeling, it's not just about the game.
Ох, неохота мне за хабаром сегодня плестись. Сейчас бы дома оказаться, в гамачке да с книжкой толковой. Пожрать бы чего хорошего. Так ведь нету. Да, настроение хуже не бывает. И гнусь кругом сплошная. А все-таки накоплю я на свой домик. Чтобы речки, и чтоб лес рядом. И ни радиации тебе, ни тварей, ни сволочей разных. И никого на горизонте. Вот и ладушки, вот и хорошо.
To a Western audience, Stalker often feels dark, even depressing. But for many in Eastern Europe, it's something entirely different. A kind of therapy, a mirror reflecting a reality they know all too well. And what about the new game? It's safe to say that Stalker 2 turned out to be a good game. Despite technical issues, most players have enjoyed the long-awaited return to the zone. The world is just as immersive and mysterious as before, filled with stunning anomalies, dynamic weather, and locations built with the same careful attention to detail that fans expected. The zone invites exploration and rewards it. However, the sequel feels less harsh and hardcore. It's more tailored to a Western audience with a heavier focus on action and cinematic storytelling. But can Slavic players still find the same atmosphere of anxiety and loneliness in Stalker 2? Can they once again lose themselves in the unforgiving world of the zone? Can the new game capture the soul of the old one? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. The original Stalker trilogy was never just a game. It captured something much deeper, a philosophy of life in the post-Soviet world. And no other game has ever done that quite the same way.
Судьба. Нет, от судьбы точно никуда не скроешься. Что на роду написано, так оно и будет. Да. Вот ведь как грустно все выходит.